Hey there, how's it going? This is a jam I did a little while ago, but due to some technical issues I haven't gotten around to making a video about it yet. But it is one I wanted to talk about because it made me think differently about making games. Personally, I'm a fan of tough games. I grew up in the NES and SNES eras, so my formative game playing years were spent repeatedly throwing my characters at what seemed like impossible challenges, with the ultimate fear of the dreaded game over. So in my mind, when I think of video game, I go back to what I grew up with. Difficult dexterity-based challenges with a stiff punishment for failure. I know that's not a correct definition, and video games are way more than that, but it is the first place that my brain goes to because of my experiences when I hear the term video game. And this is completely apparent if you look at the first game I ever made and posted online. The player is required to make precise jumps with an ever-oppressive countdown. I personally still think it's a lot of fun, but it is also very hard for a lot of players. Since making Don't Explode, I've made a lot more games, and for the most part, I've consciously tried to make them a lot less challenging. So when the 8-Bits to Infinity community announced the Easy Jam, I thought, I got this, I know how to make games easy. Then I read the requirements and realized that I've never actually made a game that was that easy. Now everyone's going to have a different interpretation of what easy actually means. So for the purpose of this jam, these are the guidelines we need to use. You don't have to do all of these, but these are to push you in the right direction of what an easy game is for this jam. I could probably get away with doing my usual type of game where if you die, you just go back to where you fell or something like that. I decided I wanted to try something different and see if I could make a game with no fail or lose state, since I've never actually done that before. On top of that, the 8-Bits to Infinity jams are always two parts, a restriction and a theme. In this case, the restriction is the easy part, which we just talked about, and the theme is no enemies, which fits in pretty well. Alright, so I need to make a game that the player can't fail with no enemies. Let's dig in. It's a little embarrassing, but I literally start off by immediately forgetting the theme and focusing on the easy part only. Seriously, I don't know how it happened, but the idea I came up with was to make a clicker-style game where enemies would move towards the player and the player would have to shoot them. If the player didn't shoot the enemy, they would auto-die when they got too close, and the player would receive a higher score the further away the enemy was when they died. For example, if the enemy died 500 pixels away from the player, then the player would get 500 points added to their score. If they died 50 pixels away, they would get that instead. So completely oblivious to my flub, I set up the player and enemies. Everything was going great. I had the enemies in, and I was trying to figure out what art theme to use and what to make the enemies actually look like. That's when someone in my Twitch chat asked what the theme was for the jam, and my palm met my face pretty fast. It's really hard to do a theme of no enemies when you're designing a game all around enemies. But I thought about it for a little while, and luckily I was able to pretty quickly change tactics, and instead of enemies that attack a player, what if they're targets that the player has to shoot? I was thinking about the games you see at carnivals where you have the little BB gun and you have to shoot the targets as they move around. I figured that would probably work pretty well, so no more enemies attacking the player. I already had the spawning, health, and movement mechanics created for the enemies, and luckily I was able to keep pretty much everything. I just had to change the movement a little bit, and permanently lock the health to 1. Instead of moving toward the player, the former enemies, now targets, will just fall straight down and be destroyed when they hit the bottom of the play area, instead of going straight to the player. Definitely not my finest moment, but I managed to not waste too much of the work I had already done. The next day, I jumped back in with both feet, and this time I planned to actually follow the rules. I found a color palette that I liked, and set out to figure out some of the look for the game. This is my usual process: build the barest of working prototypes as a proof of concept, and then create some of the key art assets. This lets me more easily see what the end result could look like. I created the falling targets and thought it would be super cute to have them falling down on undersized parachutes. And after playing with some sizing and shading, I had a large and small target that I thought looked pretty good. I added them to the game, and to give them a little more pizzazz, I added a particle effect that spawns when the target is destroyed. The particles are just made from a sliver of the target, rotated in 4 different directions. And I have to say, they made shooting the targets feel way more satisfying. I also did a test where I upped the spawn rates of the targets. I made them fall a lot more frequently. Turned out it actually made it a lot more fun, so I kept it. Now, if all you could do was click and shoot the targets, that would get a bit old pretty fast. My first thought was to add upgrades that could be purchased from a shop. So I added in a shop area, and tried out the idea of additional auto-firing guns that the player could purchase and then place in the playfield. I also created a new shooting cursor, and probably the best placeholder art for a hand you have ever seen. Its glory is so great that my Twitch chat has built a cult around it that still thrives to this day. As for the auto-fire shop items, I just didn't like the way they worked. My thought was that I could have them shoot in different directions and you would buy them and place them, but ultimately it was just kinda lackluster, and they didn't feel fun or exciting enough for me to keep spending time on. So as usual, it became Future Me's problem. I set the shop aside for a moment and decided I wanted power-ups. Can you tell yet that I didn't have a great plan for this game? This is something I need to and I've been trying to work on, as I usually tend to get a vague idea of the game I want to make, and then I just start adding pieces in hopes that at the end I can form it all together into something cohesive. I'm trying to get better about that, but for better or worse, this was my approach here. So if the power-ups aren't going to be part of the shop, how do you get them? Golden targets, of course. Every now and then, a golden target will fall with the rest. When it's destroyed, the player will get one of several buff effects for a short period. I added 4 effects: fast bullets, wobble bullets, piercing bullets, and everybody's favorite, big bullets. And yes, they can stack. To keep up with the trend on working on random stuff and just adding it in when I think about it, I next added in indicators that show the score the target gives you when it's destroyed. I also renamed score to tickets to better fit the Carnival arcade theme, as well as to add a cumulative ticket count. This way I could have an end count that the player is striving for, as well as allowing the player to spend the tickets they have collected in the shop, once Future Me gets the shop working. Since Cookie Clicker was one of the main inspirations for this game, I originally planned that you would just go as long as you wanted, but after thinking about it, I realized I wasn't going to be able to make enough content to make that fun for very long. And I figured a large number like 1,000,000 tickets would be a pretty good goal. I know most players won't actually make it to 1,000,000 tickets and finish the game, but for those that do play longer, having the game end before it becomes extra monotonous is something I do like. Great, a couple days in and I finally have a plan, but I'm still far from done. The shop has been Future Me's problem for a little while now, and it's that fateful time in every jam where the two of us become one. I didn't like my initial idea of picking up other guns and placing them down so they'll fire for you. So for the shop, I decided it would probably be better to have items that you just clicked and they would destroy a large amount of targets. No complicated pick up and place in a certain area or location or anything else that could get complicated. I started with a saw that moves back and forth horizontally across the screen, shredding any target that's in its way. And they're really fun and satisfying when you see them just mowing through targets. When you purchase the saw, it will randomly spawn at different heights across the screen so you can have multiple going at once. I dug in to make some art for the saws and they ended up looking a lot more like shuriken than saws, but I'm okay with that. Later that night, I added a bomb shop item as well. When you purchase it, it destroys all targets on the screen. Once again, distracted by shiny objects, I then added a multiplier box that pops up randomly. Think Golden Cookie and Cookie Clicker. If the player clicks it, then they get a permanent ticket multiplier. This is another item that I added to make sure the game doesn't take forever to get to the end and become too boring. Because once you get above 100,000 tickets, the score really slows down. So these permanent multipliers are a huge help. Okay, we have most of the game, but it looks awful, and at this point, it's my last day to work on it. To fit with the Carnival aesthetic, I made the bottom of the screen a counter with an attached gun, similar to how the water guns work in Carnival games. I know, it looks a lot more like a cannon, but I added an opening to see the bullets that was inspired by a skee-ball machine, and I think it came out so freaking adorable. Seriously, look at it shoot. That's the cutest pew-pew you've ever seen. Next up, I realized I didn't even have a menu in yet, so I had to get that in. It's just a bunch of rectangles, but at least it does something. Checking the time, I had 17 hours left, and I'm not sure if I can get everything done in time, but I'm certainly going to try. Also, the 8-bit jams always end in the morning on Fridays, and I never have time to get stuff done that early, so I have to make sure that I finish everything before going to sleep. For a while now, I've had boxes on the playfield that are additional multipliers, and I really didn't know what to do with them. The way they work is that if a target is destroyed while overlapping them, then on top of the other multipliers, you get another ticket multiplier as well. So again, referencing back to the Carnival aesthetic, usually in these types of games, they'll have cutouts of ducks that you can fire at. I figured I could make these multiplier areas themed as ducks, and it would make perfect sense. So, now it's time to see if I know how to draw a duck. Turns out not really, but it's good enough. I added some posts so it doesn't look like they're just floating, and I really like them. The rest of the night, I just plugged away at refining everything and making it all look good. This included updating fonts, making art for elements that were still missing, adding sound effects, adding screen shake, and I added a hilly type background that will eventually change into the standard stripe background once the player reaches 100,000 tickets. And this is again just to help break up the sameness of the gameplay so the background is not always the same thing through the entire game. Now the last thing to do is to make the menu look presentable, and I feel like I did a passable job, which generally is what happens with menus for me in game jams. And this all took me way too long, I stayed up way too late, and I ended up submitting the game at 4 AM with 6 hours left until the deadline. Again, I won't be able to work on the game in the morning, so it had to be done tonight. Hence the staying up so late. With everything submitted, this is the final game, where you are trying to collect 1,000,000 tickets. There is no way to lose other than to not play. If the player does nothing, the targets will fall and be destroyed by the counter. Each target that's destroyed will give the player a number of tickets that increases the higher up it is when it breaks. If the target is destroyed over the multiplier duck sign, then the tickets collected are increased by the multiplier. And you also get to hear the really fun duck sound effect I made. You can spend your tickets on shop items that will destroy multiple targets at once, but their cost will increase as you buy more and more. When a golden target is destroyed, a bullet modifier is applied for a short time. Also, as the game is played, a golden ticket will appear briefly. If the player clicks on it, they will be granted a permanent multiplier to the tickets collected up to 20x. And when the player finally reaches 1 million tickets, the "You Win" screen appears and congratulates the player. And that's the entirety of Target Clicker. I'm really happy with the way this game turned out. I do wish I had had time to add more shop items and bullet modifiers, but that's just how game jams go sometimes. And overall, I think the game is really enjoyable. It's a very different approach to making a game than I usually take, and it was fun to look at creating a challenge that wasn't hard and didn't have a fail state, but was still engaging enough to play. In the context of this jam and its requirements, I'd say this game is definitely easy. If the game is running, you're making progress. If you don't do anything, it's glacially slow progress, but it's still moving forward. And the theme of no enemies, which I almost forgot about, I think made the game way better. I feel that having enemies rushing the player would have been fun, but it definitely would have had a totally different tone. Because of the no enemy theme, I found the carnival aesthetic, which I really like and I feel really helped the way this game turned out. If you'd like to give the game a try, it's up on my itch page and the link is in the description below. I usually end these Game Jam devlogs with how the game did in the jam, but I actually can't this time. During the jam, I was asked to be a judge for the 8-Bits to Infinity community, and I accepted, which means that this game is no longer allowed to be part of the competition since I'm a judge. I've won the 8-Bits jams in the past, and I'm happy that now I can encourage others and give feedbacks in all future jams. And ultimately, this jam was a blast. I really enjoyed approaching the idea of fun without failure. I found it to be a really good design exercise. It won't be changing the way I make games normally, but it was definitely fun to do. Thank you all so much for watching, and an extra special thank you to my video producer tier patrons. In these crazy times, your generosity is greatly appreciated. If you would like to see your name in a future video or game, and want to see these videos before anyone else, the link is in the description. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can message me on Twitter, talk to me during my live streams, or better yet, join the Discord community with me and a bunch of other really cool people. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more in the future, please consider liking and subscribing. And I will talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.